Silicon Valley, technology, art, green, and sustainability.
Hi, welcome to Silicon Valley Tech, Art, Green, and Sustainability. Today I have a leader in wine production and growing of grapes for quite a while here in Silicon Valley, Jerold O'Brien. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So can you tell the audience your winery name and yourself, a little background?
Okay, as you said, I'm Jerold O'Brien. The winery and vineyard is named Silver Mountain Vineyards. We're in the Santa Cruz Mountains, quite high up actually, 2,100 feet elevation.
Is that hard to grow at that elevation?
It's not difficult, it's different. High elevation and cooler climate locations are different. You have to think different, and then you have to farm differently for that.
So in the history of the winery, you've had the winery since 1979, which
Correct.
You built in 1979. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
actually, I bought the property in '73. Started, as you mentioned, started the winery in '79. The original winery, which was essentially a wood frame building on a concrete slab, very simple structure. Operated that winery for 10 years, from '79 until October 17th of 1989, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we had this great movement of the earth, and my winery went away.
the Loma Prieta.
Loma Prieta
I remember
Earthquake.
it well. I was going to West Valley College at the time and driving there. Thought that my car axle had given out or something, and when I got out to look, realized everybody else was doing the same thing. Well, it must have been an earthquake.
Yes, it was.
So you had a little damage and rebuilt?
We did. We actually lost the entire winery structure and 3 years worth of production that was in the winery. But it forced me to start over again, and I built a new winery.
So when you say production, it was already things in the barrels getting ready to sell?
Yes. Yeah, there was wine in barrels and wine in cases, both. And I say what we had produced for the last 3 years was in the winery and was lost.
So I think that we're going to queue up some photos of the winery now and take a look at how it looks now. It's beautiful. And I've had your wine many, many times at different events. You've always been so gracious at the Las Gatas Jazz in the Plaza and different places. Tasted your wine a million times, hadn't been up to the winery and finally got up there this year. Beautiful location, and we're looking at some of the photos now. So how long did it take you to rebuild this?
About 5 years.
5 years. And I think you told me when you bought it originally there was some grapes there, correct?
That's correct. This property actually had grapes on it starting in the 1860s and had grapes growing until about 1900, 1910, 1913 actually. And then it changed over to fruit trees. In my case, it was prunes and cherries. And then
are there still prunes and cherries on there?
No. For 50 years, the people owned it, farmed the orchard, and then they stopped farming it. And then in 1972, I found it, bought it in '73. That time it was an orchard. It was only an orchard, what was left of an orchard. It had been abandoned. And so I started from scratch with bare land.
And you had mentioned to me a fantastic story about Prohibition and the winery's history and the Santa Cruz Mountains history. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and the connection there? Because that's really fascinating. I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Okay, as I mentioned, my land was an example of what happened in the Santa Cruz Mountains in a general basis, in that the wine industry started 1850, 1860, grew until about 1900 when it peaked, and then started to deteriorate from 1900 till 1913, which was Prohibition, as you mentioned. And at that time, most of the people, and I say most, there was approximately 4,000 acres of grapes in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
4,000 acres, that's amazing.
At that time, 1900 to 1913. and the industry started to die down, and then in 1913, everybody, except for about 150 acres worth, changed from grapevines to fruit trees.
And that was due to Prohibition?
Due to Prohibition, exactly.
So 1900 to 1930s?
And then 1913 was Prohibition, and it ended in 33. And in 1933, then there was not much, it was still the end of the Depression, not much in the way of progress was taking place. But finally in the 40s and then certainly in the 50s, the wine industry started to come back to the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it went from, let's say, 150 acres during Prohibition back up to about 1,500 acres now.
Wow.
Today in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
So before Prohibition, 4,000 acres?
4,000, that's
and
correct.
And 15,000 now?
1,500.
1,500.
Yes.
And I think you had mentioned something else about the Prohibition, about the wine buyers from San Francisco.
Ah.
And one of the reasons it didn't so quickly pick up the growing in Santa Cruz Mountains was because of...
Yes. Part of the reason that the wine industry deteriorated between it started to deteriorate before 1913, Prohibition, is that most of the wine that was produced in the Santa Cruz Mountains was sold in barrel to brokers in San Francisco, or negociants, who in turn bottled the wine and then sold it. Well, the people in the Santa Cruz Mountains were quite independent and were not happy about the price that the brokers were offering and some of the terms and such. So the brokers in San Francisco decided that they were tired of dealing with the independent mountain people from the Santa Cruz Mountains area, and they supported the development of wine production north of the city in Sonoma County and Napa County, because those people were easier to get along with. And that's part of the deterioration.
So the rebels of Santa Cruz Mountains have always been.
Always been rebels, that's correct.
That's pretty interesting. And it's very fascinating that it was kind of cultivated more in Napa. And when you think about wine growing, you know, you never really think about before 1900 that there was a lot of that. And you think of kind of, you know, the 50s, 60s, 70s
yes.
as the wine industry exploding.
That's right.
So it's interesting to find out that in the Santa Cruz Mountains that there was cultivation of that for a long time.
Oh, yeah. It was as large an area as existed prior, and the wines from the Santa Cruz Mountains were judged to be among the best, if not the best, in the New World at that time.
Now, sustainability and wine growing, organic, different terms, and organic has kind of been a longer term. Sustainability is kind of new. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and what you guys are doing at your winery at the Silver Mountain with sustainability and organic?
Sure. You're right. The term organic is regulated by federal law. The term sustainable is not. Therefore, many people can use sustainable in different circumstances, and it can mean different things to different people. We understand sustainable as a concept more than a set of rules today. But organic is in fact a set of rules. It's essentially rules that prohibit the use of artificial and synthetic materials in the growing of grapes and in the making of wine. Silver Mountain has been organic since the very beginning, although I did not realize it was organic since the very beginning. But,
they didn't call it that in the 70s?
That's correct. In fact, I grew grapes, planted grapes, and farmed the way I felt like farming per my philosophy of being in harmony with Mother Nature, respecting Mother Nature. I was growing grapes for 10 years, and then I was showing a visitor around the vineyard and talking about it. That visitor said, you know, that's called organic farming. And I'd never even heard the term. But I looked into it and investigated it and said, and asked for certification. The certifiers came out, investigated, and said, yes, indeed, you've been farming organically for a long time, so we'll certify you right away. No.
So it didn't take very much time then?
You know, normally, when one applies for certification, it requires a 3-year transition period.
And that's now and then?
And then. Has been, always has been. But at that time, they realized I had been farming organically, so they did not make me wait the 3 years. So
now, is that because they want people to come out and investigate how they're doing, but because you had already been doing that for so long, it got kind of pushed through?
Well, it did go through because the investigators inspectors realized that I had been farming organically for well more than 3 years. So they certified me right away. And now I've been certified for 20 years, and actually farming organically for 30 years, whereas I was the only organic vineyard in the Santa Cruz Mountains until about 5 years ago.